Welcome to the Time for a Reset podcast, the podcast where I, Paul Frampton, interview senior marketers on the big issues of the day and the thing that they want to see reset with an ever-changing landscape. Welcome back to another episode of Time for a Reset. I'm your host, Paul Frampton, and delighted to have you back here with us. Today, I am joined by Aidaly Sosa, who is the head of marketing in the United States for Tony's Chocol. And Tony's is very much known as a mission-driven company in the chocolate space. So I'm looking forward to digging into that a little bit more with Aidaly. But the first thing that we're going to start with is digging into our own reset. Just before that, I'll tell you that Aidaly spent a good deal of her career in Europe. She was primary at a company called G-Star Raw, where she transversed a number of different roles in the marketing division, including core marketing and PR. And then she spent some time in London after Amsterdam and then moved to New York and has been running Tony's business out there. So has both a geographic and kind of marketing diversity that I think will be super interesting for us to listen to. So welcome, Aidaly. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me here. I look forward to speaking to you.
Likewise, it's great to have you too. So, Aidaly, we always start in the same place, which is to frame up what the thing that you would most like to reset in the marketing industry. So we'll start there if you don't mind.
Yeah, the thing I would like to reset, I would say, is the abundance of media buy and spaces where media buy is conducted right now that is coming towards you as a consumer. So I'm taking my marketing professional hat off and just looking at it from a consumer lens, and just the amount of advertising coming your way at every corner on every platform. I think it's a lot, and I would love to reset that and for us to focus on messages that do matter and messages that have more impact and more meaning and that can mean something to the consumer instead of this overload of everything everywhere.
Right. I think that's very well put and absolutely a good idea for us to occasionally take off our marketing practitioner hats and think about being a consumer, which easy to say, but probably isn't done as often as it should be. Aidaly, do you think this has got worse in recent years with the proliferation of digital channels and ads in all sorts of places, whether it's where you're listening to music or when you're driving your car? Like, is it getting worse or has it just always been thus?
I think it is getting worse. I mean, in the main vehicles of media, it was always there. But I think at this moment, it is getting worse because we're so much more dependent on our phones or any way of our digital presence in our daily lives that we get like bombarded with it a little bit more. I'll give you an example. If you put like an address in Waze and you're driving, then in the middle of my drive, I get a pop-up. Hey, have you seen a Dunkin' Donuts? And I'm like, I don't care about Dunkin' Donuts right now. I just want to get where I want to get. And it's a pop-up screen. I need to close it. And so it's kind of like disruptive in not in such a good time or a good way that I want to be disrupted.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And if I put my media planner hat on, I can see myself going, well, this is perfect. People are driving, they're hungry, and there's a great context. It's a captive audience, albeit it could be a bit dangerous to add in front of. But of course, just because the context is right and the moment is right doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right time to communicate to a consumer, does it?
Yeah, I think if I look at it from that sense, it's also, oh, wait, they're driving. Do you want to make a pit stop at Dunkin' Donuts and get a coffee? Yeah, that sounds amazing. But then when you're actually driving, it's kind of like, no, I just want to get from point A to point B. I don't want to deal with this right now.
Right. And there's a danger that there are points at which advertising can feel very intrusive and then becomes an irritant. And I think that is a good example where you're obviously not meant to be interacting with your phone when you're driving using Waze anyway. So the fact that an ad comes up, it almost encourages you to touch your phone and do something that we know we're not meant to do. And actually, potentially, you have a negative feeling towards that brand rather than acting on it or feeling positively towards them, which, of course, is the whole point of advertising.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the original forms of advertising, whether it be like TV or the radio, it was more in that moment where you're sitting down and where you're listening that you're like consuming this media as well. The other reason why I think a reset is worth on advertising in general is that I feel like that has in marketing has become the answer to everything. And I think working for a company that is so focused on the mission, Tony's has one mission. It is eliminating exploitation out of the cocoa industry. In the cocoa industry right now, you have a lot of cases of modern day slavery, a lot of child labor, or farmers that just don't make enough to be able to earn a living wage once they sell their crop of beans. So coming from a company that has its heart very set on its mission, I think when you're speaking to advertising agencies or to other like agencies for support, I think media buy is very quickly the answer to send your message across. And I think it's worth for us to think a little deeper in terms of the mission of what we're doing, the purpose in our North Star, to kind of look at things differently and think of more creatively and not jumping to the pay for play or to the paid for being noticed, but paying more attention to the content that we put into everything we do as a business.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. A lot of companies talk about having a purpose, and a lot of marketing panels obsess about talking about purpose. But Tony's was, as far as I know, and I'd love to hear a bit more from you, was, as you say, designed for a very purposeful mission. It wasn't like they tried to find a purpose after launching a company to go and make tons of money. So it is at the very heart of the business. How does that change life for you as a marketeer versus the previous places that you've worked at?
So the different companies I worked at, they also had like, for example, G-Star, they were very serious about sustainability. And they had like a very advanced team that worked into just thinking about sustainable materials that could go into the product. And I think that's where I started kind of leaning more into the purpose-led product or the purpose-led services or the purpose-led offering that you're giving to consumers. So I think a lot of companies have that embedded in them. I think a lot of companies don't dare to speak too much about it if it's new or if they're starting fresh, because they're afraid of criticism. And I think the difference with Tony's is that the company was founded in order to combat exploitation in the cocoa industry. So that was the sole purpose. It was started by these journalists that just went to West Africa. They were doing some investigative journalism and firsthand experience cases of child labor, cases of modern day slavery. So they went back and they had like a show that this was reported on. And based on that, the journalists, they were shocked that nothing was being done. So to make the long story short, they started Tony's to really prove that you can have traceable beans in your chocolate, and you can have a chocolate that your entire supply chain is visible, and you can be held accountable for what happens in your supply chain because you know for sure that you know what's happening, which is the opposite of what other brands say, is that they don't know what happens in their supply chain. So they kind of like hide a little bit behind that. So I think that really helps in terms of just if you have that North Star, that it's very easy to, or easier to really know your purpose and really be very disciplined about communicating around your purpose and how you communicate around your purpose. And also that everything that you do within the company is feeding into this bigger purpose. So it's not about having a campaign that is on one collection or one drop or like a special SKU that you're dropping for one specific messaging, but everything is embedded in like your core story of the brand.
Lovely. No, I can really see that. And actually, as you rightly say, when you do have a clear why, as Simon Sinek calls, a clear purpose mission, you can ask yourselves, does what we're about to do ladder back up to that? And it actually really helps build consistent marketing, but also consistent culture and thinking. So, but one of the things that I'm left wondering, and I'm sure some of the guests are left wondering, is how do you, as the person that has to ensure that every touch point does bring to life the mission, other than what you talked about in terms of not just putting ads into kind of places where it doesn't have meaning, what are the other things that you do as a marketing practitioner that make sure that you're constantly bringing things back to a mission? Because I can see that absolutely makes sense, but I can also see that it must at times be quite challenging to always do that.
Yeah, So for us, it's in a way embedded in our product. So if you look at our chocolate bar, we have like a bigger, chunkier chocolate bar. And on the chocolate within the branding, we have Tony's Chocolate Only. And we have a button, our open chain button. You can read our mission there. When you turn the chocolate, when you look on the back of pack, there's our mission statement there as well, that we exist to eliminate child labor and modern day slavery out of the cocoa industry. And then when you open up the package, inside of the wrapper, we have our full manifesto that again tells the story a little bit more in depth. So that's the first thing that a consumer sees, that they touch. So that already helps us deliver part of the message. And then when you open our chocolate bar, unlike other brands, our chocolate bar is unequally divided. And there's a story behind that as well, that our chocolate bar is unequally divided to represent the unequally divided cocoa industry. So every aspect of the product tells a part of the story. So I have to say that our design and product development team very early on in the foundation of the brand made sure that this was very clear. So that helps.
Yeah, for sure.
And next to that, when we do campaigns, we always make sure that it ladders up to our bigger mission. But we're also not afraid to tell our story. So we do a lot of talks. When you're onboarded as a marketing professional at Tony's, it is expected from you that you do a lot of public speaking, whether it's at a university in front of a marketing class or whether it's at a TED Talk, which we've done quite a few. It's expected that you do this.
You contribute to telling the story yourselves in
Yes.
groups of people. That's super interesting. I've never heard that before.
We all tell the story, and for each of our partners, that retailers that buy the product, we make sure that we work on the education of their staff as well. But next to that, we make sure that when we do media advertising, that it's mission led as well.
Yeah.
That we're very selective when we do it. So it's not a matter of, okay, we're going to do this every 3 months or something like that. We make sure that, okay, what are the developments that have happened? What are the contributions that we've had? What is a story that we have to tell? And based on that, decide, okay, these are the vehicles that we can use to tell the story, instead of being like, oh, we need to do a flight of media advertising every 3 months. What do we have to fill it in with?
No. That really brings to life how you take an overarching mission and purpose and ensure that it's consistent and authentic everywhere. Do you ever struggle to get partners, agencies, media owners to connect and care enough with the stories? Because at times, and I've been in that world, so I can say it with some truth, at times agencies can be a little transactional and a bit too focused on delivering the media brilliantly and their craft, but they sometimes lose some of the nuances around the nature of the business vertical or the story behind that in particular. So I'm just wondering do you ever have challenges with that? And if you do, how do you overcome them?
So last year is the first time that we did media buy in the US. So it's the first time that we did it. And we did it in Europe as well. But we realized that we could use more platform or more way to tell our story, especially if we're introducing the brand to a new market. It is very helpful to introduce ourselves through paid media. And what we realized is that we've been speaking to different agencies in different countries, and we are like a breath of fresh air for them, because they're like, this is unconventional. Agencies have a lot of talented creatives that sometimes wish they could just not living according to color between the lines, and just have that freedom to really say what's on their mind and not hold themselves back. And I think that the agencies, at least that we've worked with so far, that we've been speaking to so far, have expressed that a lot, that they're like, oh, wait, we can really be a little bit more provocative in our messaging because you guys have that cheeky tone of voice and you guys are not afraid to rough up some feathers. So in our experience, it's been nice. And the way that they've taken it on is the complete opposite of transactional. They've all seen it as, oh my God, we have a brand that has a very serious mission, and they love working with a mission-led company, and especially a company that is a little bit more provocative in their messaging. So it's been great so far.
It's good to hear that the industry recognises when there is a brand that is not so rigid, shall we say, but also a brand that is generally trying to do things that make the planet better and are willing to lean in and support in different ways than they might normally and not be so obsessed just around the commercial side.
Yeah, like I said in the beginning, you have a lot of brands that want to pivot and start really thinking about their mission and their impact. And they want to communicate about that. And sometimes it's seen as like greenwashing or something else. So I think for agencies, it's also good to work with some mission impact companies to really get that experience on the messaging so that they can advise brands that are a little bit more shy and a little bit more hesitant to communicate about their missions to guide them and to formulate that message to do bring it across. Because I think some brands do a lot when it comes to sustainability, but it's all under the surface. So people don't see it, but they're so shy to communicate about it. So I think I would like to see that more.
No, I agree. I remember when Paul Pullman, CEO of Unilever, started to really put a focus on talking about planet as well as all of the other P's. And when he started to normalize the importance of thinking about the supply chain and sustainability and the UN's priorities, suddenly others started to do so. And it is so important that brands do take a stance and have a soapbox, and you guys have got that and it's authentic to you. And I love the fact that all of your talent is encouraged to do that as well, because the founders obviously believe that if everyone contributes a little bit to drive change, then more change will occur, I assume.
Absolutely. So that's why our mission is also that together we can make the cocoa industry exploitation free, just to indicate that it takes more than us as a brand, but it really takes an entire industry. It takes like the consumers, the journalists, it takes all of us to make changes. And I think that really counts for basically everything.
Yeah, it's inspiring. So now what I'm really interested in, Aidaly, is I often ask about the role of marketing in a business and how important it is. I mean, you've already told us that the purpose was very much ingrained in the product. It was ingrained in the culture. Sometimes businesses have a struggle to go, oh, we've written a purpose when we're 50 years old and now we're trying to retrofit ourselves to it. You clearly don't have that challenge, but I'm left wondering, how key and critical is marketing just per se in its broadest sense to the business? Like when the board or the founders or whoever else are sitting there, like how important is marketing in those conversations?
I think that marketing is extremely important in those conversations, because I think marketing can also make a clear distinction between this is just like work that we're supposed to be doing right now. This is like the status quo of nowadays, that you need to live up to the standard. And marketing can also recognize what from that is really innovative and what of that is really going to inspire others to change and inspire others to do something similar. So I think that marketing can recognize that, and marketing can really advise into how to bring these messages forward, because you have a lot of times that sometimes if the right people are not around the table to formulate these campaigns or to formulate these missions, that they fall short in the eyes of the consumer, because the consumer has become so much more critical. And I think the role of marketing has become far more broad in the sense that it's like a little bit of your corporate responsibility. The marketing can also support and shine a light on that to make sure that things don't come across as greenwashing and that the changes are really innovations, really like celebrating what needs to be done for us to get to a better purpose, better planet, better businesses.
And usually, like what we know as consumers, or what society usually kind of expects, is that solving problems like child poverty or exploitation in the cocoa industry, or we could pick anything, famine, water, usually that ends up being done by a non-for-profit or ends up being done by an NGO. And then you have obviously all of the commercial enterprises who predominantly in a capitalist world that we've lived in for so many decades are driven by making money. Now, I'm pretty sure that Tony's also believes in making money, probably actually to then support the cause it's driving more. But I'm interested in how you find that balance between, I guess, profit and purpose is probably the easiest way to frame it.
Yeah. So for us, that's extremely important. Tony's mission is to educate people on these issues and inspire people to like act on them. And I think the way to inspire businesses to act on them is to really show that you can't have traceable beans, and you can have a very transparent supply chain, and you can be open and honest, and you can be working with local farmers to resolve like cases of child labor, but you can also be a for-profit business. I think our whole business model is to have both, to really inspire others to act and to not have the lack of profit be a reason for them not to act. So to eliminate that dilemma completely.
Good to know that. I can't remember who told me this, but it was someone pretty inspiring that did a lot of work in similar spaces. And his way of articulating was that the more profit you make in a business that has a clear purpose, the more good you can actually do.
That too, yeah.
If you don't have profit, you can't invest resources, you can't invest in a marketing team, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of obvious when you say it out loud, yet we do tend to have parts of our world like academics and non-for-profits that focus purely on certain kind of non-commercial aspects, and then businesses that are really focused on, let's call it optimization, whether that's margin or product or supply chain. And it is nice. I like it when we are able to find an intersection of the two, where businesses can show that they can do both. And we obviously heard a lot in the last few years around even big investment organizations like BlackRock are starting to look for businesses that have got social purpose. I mean, it's only the very start, but if this continues in 10 years' time, hopefully it'll almost be frowned upon if a business isn't able to prove that it's able to drive some social good and improve the planet, rather than us having a debate in a corner about climate change and exploitation and kind of diversity. And then in business, it be talked about, but almost virtue signaled towards without any truth. The fact that businesses like yours prove that it is possible to do both and to balance both objectives and not have them in friction, I think is really inspiring.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think if you look at brands like Patagonia, it's also like a good example of a company that has a very clear North Star and makes decision very much based on that, but they're balancing the two things.
Yeah, no, Patagonia is another great example. You're absolutely right. So I wanted to maybe just change direction a little bit and ask about you. Obviously, when I invite guests onto the podcast, our listeners often say, Aidaly or so-and-so's got it all together, they know what they're doing, and I can't be like them. So I like to show a little bit of vulnerability and to demonstrate to those listeners that everybody's always a work in progress and everyone's always working on things. So in this world where you exist in an organization trying to make a real impact, I'm sure you think every morning, how do I make a bigger impact? So could you maybe share some thoughts on that for people?
Yeah, of course. Like you said, we're all like a work in progress, and sometimes you win some, you lose some. But I think it's important to keep in mind your bigger purpose. Tony's as a company is a company where we encourage everyone to be outspoken. So you are allowed to express if you don't agree, and it is listened to. The advice that I can give is don't go beyond the level that you're comfortable with, because a lot of the times you come out with a compromise, and a lot of times you see that after a long time of really bringing it up and flagging it and really being determined about it, you do start seeing more change.
Right. No, I really like that. And would I be right in hearing from some of what you just said that you're also talking about authenticity and having a clear personal brand, as it's often called?
Absolutely, yeah.
No, I think that's really good advice. And the last bit of advice I'll ask your opinion on, Aidaly, is for the marketeers that are listening to the podcast. Some of them are probably thinking, wow, it's super inspiring. Tony's has got such a great mission and I do work in a great business, but it doesn't have such a clear purpose. How would you advise people in their own organizations to make sure that they're doing the most for their organization through its marketing to drive change and to do good marketing, I suppose?
I think on one hand, it's good to be disruptive and abrupt and kind of like have these very strong moments. But on the other hand, I think like if you're working for a company that has been around for 50 years, I think looking at progress with a positive lens is very important, because some companies don't, like, it takes a little bit. You know, if you're like in a small sailboat, you can move very easily. But if you're like a much larger boat, the turn just takes a while. And I think the advice that I can give is to appreciate the progress, but be also critical about the progress, but critical and realistic about the progress within that company. And don't be discouraged by small steps, because it takes every step to get there. At Tony's, we have the luxury of taking bigger steps and being able to take those. So if everyone can get there, that's brilliant. But I also think that realistically, some major Titanics will have to start smaller and then really look at the progress, appreciate it, but also be critical about it and continue it at a steady pace.
Right. No, that's wonderful advice. And I can imagine even in some of what Tony's doing, you obviously, as you say, you need to do it together with customers, partners, the industry. There'll be times when you have to be realistic that the change isn't going to come as quickly as you might want it. And for a lot of people that are coming up inside businesses, I think often people think that you can just go and influence once in a meeting and things will change. But obviously, as we all get a bit older and wiser, you realize that change is hard and it requires commitment, it requires different techniques, requires different muscles. And so I like the piece around being critical about whether you're doing enough, but also being realistic and sometimes giving yourself as an individual or your company some grace, because even 0.2% progress is progress.
Yeah. The critical mind is also important in that mix. If you feel like it's not enough, if you feel like it's being hypocritical, also I think that should be addressed as well. Yeah,
I like that thought. So I've really enjoyed the conversation, Aidaly. You've taken us from starting by let's rethink the amount of advertising and the saturation and whether actually ads in certain places are right. And in actual fact, whether advertising is necessarily always the best vehicle for marketing, and then talked a lot about the importance of mission and purpose and how that authentically should be able to connect across through a business. And then, I guess, how to find the right balance between profit and purpose and the fact that you can have businesses that do both. And then you just left us with some great advice for people. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Aidaly, and all that remains is for me to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope I inspired a few to really go and try to do more business for good and have more of an impact in what they do.
Undoubtedly you did. And it's a good reminder, actually, that our business is around telling stories. And if the story is a good story, then everyone should want to be out there telling that story.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Time for a Reset. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. We'll be back talking to a senior marketeer very soon. Make sure you don't miss out on any new episodes by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, and leave us a review at timeforareset.co.uk.